Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. Thank you for joining us today. Engineering wanted to get back in front of you guys. We've had a lot with the small cells and they are constantly changing. So we do have our ordinance in place, but with the continuous change in the small cell and the equipment, we wanted to get back in front of you and provide you an update on where we are today. And so we've had previous communications with you, and we've talked about some of the concerns associated with the small cells. So we wanted to kind of get in front of you and give you an update of where we are on our small cell status. And then also we do have today Dr. Andrew Afflerbach, and he also helped us step through the original ordinance process. And so we have him here also to help. He'll do a little bit of a presentation and then answer any questions you might have. And then we'll leave a discussion and questions at the end. Kevin Gorder's taken over for me in this right-of-way management area. So he will do the presentation for you today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commissioners. We'll step through this real quickly. Dr. Afflerbach is really the star of the show, so we'll let him get to it. But I want to just step back and kind of get you up to speed where we are. So 2017, we wrote an ordinance for wireless communication facilities, added some master attachment agreement requirements, and that addresses things like duration of how long you can be on the right-of-way, renewals, all that kind of stuff. And then in 2018, this whole process was kind of thrown for a loop. The FCC came out with an order addressing small cells and local government response. Kind of tied our hands a little bit, but it did give us an opportunity to kind of develop other things to kind of help us along. It encourages state and local government facilitated deployment, had some fee restrictions, but the biggest thing was the fairness among all competitors. As we go a little further in, 2019, after conversations with cell providers, really trying to balance the FCC order with the providers and the desires of the city and how we interpret the order. We've adjusted our ordinance, and like Brenda said, we'll be coming with another adjustment here in the near future as we talk to more of them. The FCC ruling as far as charges considerably reduced what we had originally had in the 2017 ordinance, but FCC ruling had about $100 for an application fee, $270 a year. For rental fees, the city of Fargo decided to go with the $100, but $175 per installation. That was really to match Minnesota state statute. Wanted to be similar with those guys as far as a competitive balance between Minnesota and North Dakota. So that's how we got to that number. In 2019, we developed and published standards that comply with the FCC order, added an application, design standards, construction requirements, facility guidelines, and a shot clock waiver form. Part of the FCC order is there's 3 types of shot clocks based on the application and how long you have to respond or approve this small cell installation. Interesting enough, the other North Dakota municipalities, they're using the city of Fargo's ordinance and supporting documents as a framework in their approach to small cells. So there's a lot of consistency across the state of North Dakota with how Fargo did it compared to how the rest of the state is doing it. And now just lately, we've been working with DOT on a process to permit small cells on DOT-controlled roadways. Thinking Main Avenue, 10th Street, University Drive, things like that. So as we look at this, Fargo strongly encourages applicants to place small cells in the current infrastructure, so an existing light pole, signal pole, anything that we can use to really reduce clutter. There could be a lot of these poles in the right-of-way, and if we can use the poles that are there for a public purpose and multi-purpose them, it just eliminates poles in our right-of-way, so we don't have to deal with all the clutter. The applicant's responsible for the upgrading the footing, the pole, restoring the light equipment, providing replacement poles in case it gets knocked down. So there's a lot of responsibilities that we're placing on the applicant in the situation. Real quick update to where we are. Mobility, they were connected with Sprint. Sprint and T-Mobile have recently merged, but they did enter into a master attachment agreement in May of 2018. They were prior to the FCC ruling. So their language is a little different than what it would be with Verizon as we get to that. But Mobility installed 5 small cells kind of around 42nd Street area from about Main Avenue down to the Petro truck stop. So not exactly on 42nd, but kind of that corridor they followed down as they were putting in their small cells. Verizon, we entered into a master attachment agreement in June of 19. They have 4 locations in downtown that they are currently proposing, and we just received those applications in the last 2 weeks, so we're reviewing those applications right now. Other providers, we're still discussing what they might want to do in Fargo. Haven't heard a lot from them, but we have had conversations with AT&T and others as they start looking at coming into Fargo. Where are we at? Not 5G yet. All of the mobility application or installations were 4G, but the signs indicate that these will all be sometime upgraded to 5G technology. So it's coming. So what will 5G provide? And I just kind of did some searching over the last week and over the weekend. Speed is the biggest change in 5G. If you look from some information on Consumer Technology Association, the differences to download a 2-hour movie from 3G to 5G is incredible. If you look at the numbers, 26 hours on 3G to 6 minutes on 4G to 3.6 seconds on 5G to download a 2-hour movie. The speed is incredible. What does that do? It's that instantaneous response in 5G. It starts to create applications like autonomous vehicles. And almost everything you read about autonomous vehicles, you need 5G to make it work. You need that quick millisecond response to make autonomous vehicles work. So talking CV2X technology, it's cellular vehicle to everything communication. The vehicles are talking to each other, they're talking to a signal cabinet, they're talking to a parking garage, they're talking to pedestrians. They have all this communication that is enabled by 5G technology. You say that, and then the car companies aren't in agreement. Ford says they're going to start installing this technology in 22. Tesla says you don't need it. So as you read things, as you search the internet, you get different takes on where each car company might be. So that's just a little touch on autonomous vehicles. So that's a quick update. If we can wait with questions, unless you want to have questions now, but if we can go through Dr. Afflerbach's presentation, he's got far more information with this technology. And Andrew he's the CEO and CTO of CTC Technology Energy, engineering and business consulting for the public sector. Like Brenda said, he helped us with the ordinance in 2017. He specializes in a lot of things, and his full bio is in front of you. If you guys want to read it, his full bio is there. He specializes in planning, design, implementation, broadband communication networks, developed strategic technical guidance on wired and wireless communications for over 20 years, testified as an expert witness on broadband communication issues, and is consultant on critical policy issues with the FCC. So he is a leader in this field. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Andrew Afflerbach. I will load his presentation, and I will try to keep up with it. We tried having him control it, but the software didn't quite talk to each other quite right. So here we are. So Andrew?
Good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for being here today and spending some time with me this afternoon. I wanted to, if we can go to the next slide here, just quickly provide an overview and give you the opportunity at the end to ask questions about areas of interest or concern. Just a little bit of background about CTC. The main thing I want to underscore here is that we don't do work for the wireless carriers. We don't do work for companies like Mobility or Crown Castle and so forth that do installation. We're an independent broker who works for the state and local governments in this area. And we have people within our firm who have worked with those folks in the past and have deep expertise in those areas and have a sense of what they're looking for and where they're coming from. But in the end, our client is the city that we work for, and we've provided advice to a wide range of organizations, including public power associations, National League of Cities, and we've done filings for the FCC on behalf of our municipal and state clients. Next slide. So what I want to cover today are, first of all, why all this technology, where is it coming from and where is it going? Many of you know a lot of this information, so I'll do that in kind of broad brush. 5G, what it is, and why it's something that's appearing on the horizon. But as Kevin mentioned, it's still very much on the horizon, not just in Fargo, but elsewhere. I wanted to talk about radio frequency emissions from the point of view of engineering. I'm an engineer. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one. I don't, have any ambitions in those areas. But there's, I think, important points to speak to from the engineering standpoint on this that I do want to cover again from an independent view, not that of the wireless industry and not of those opposed to the wireless industry either, based on our engineering knowledge and experience. And finally, the FCC regulations and the order, as Kevin mentioned, is very important to the city role in how you work with the small cells, and I wanted to kind of cover that and how that fits in, and then leave time for the Q&A. Next slide, please. Next. So what's all this about? It's about getting more speed to your devices and to us, basically, for all the things that we're doing in broadband with COVID and so forth, and what we're doing today. It's clear that sort of put the last nail in the coffin of those who felt like, well, do we really need this broadband? Does it have to be? We're building this out. Is that necessary to us? And I think it's very clear that for work, for learning, for medical care, that's where we need to be. And this chart shows, you see on the axis from the left to the right, it's different speeds. And I'm not sure if actually it's not working because it's on your screen here, but if you look at the speeds like 10 to 50 megabits per second, they're kind of in the middle there. You see that's sort of the transition from 3G, 4G to 5G. And 25 is about the point where the FCC defines broadband. It's about the point also at which things like this conferencing application we're using right now, Zoom and so forth, become basically effective and reliable. So you see that the 5G technology is through software, through use of spectrum and so forth. That's the technology that's going to be needed as we push for higher and higher speeds for things like vehicular automation, drones, and all that kind of stuff. And the things we don't really know about because, of course, we didn't know that 4G was going to be needed for. We knew that it was in advance, but we didn't know that we would have iPhones and Android phones and all the things that we're used to now. And so 5G presumably will bring other things that we're not aware of yet that will become central to that. I want to also call your attention to the technologies up at the top, which are the wired technologies. Part of why the wireless industry is going to 5G is because this is going to allow it to become competitive with cable and with fiber providers. So a lot here from the commercial standpoint, from competition, and from the point of view of new technologies. Next slide, please. So small cells, as Kevin mentioned, clutter, and that's obviously a key consideration, aesthetics and so forth. When you have something like small cells that are going to be materializing in communities in order to make some of this technology work, that's going to be a permanent change in the landscape of our communities, and it's going to be done effectively, have to be an effective partnership between the city and the industry. So small cells are typically located now on utility poles, light poles, or a new pole structure, although many communities like Huron are trying to restrict proliferation of new poles that are just purpose-built for this. When you're putting them on poles, there are a lot of engineering considerations, including that they don't pose a hazard with respect to telecom and power that's in space already on these poles, that they're structurally stable. Generally, these small cells are not small. When you hear people talk in front of the FCC, for some reason, they're always talking about a pizza box. I don't see anything in this picture that looks like a pizza, but basically you've got things like 2 or 3 foot cylindrical antennas like the one you see at the top, a cabinet that's a little bit obstructed by the tree there, but essentially you're talking about usually 3 foot by 2 foot and components that are typically above the ground, although in some metro areas there have been motion to kind of put these in underground vaults and enclosures that are on the surface. In some cases, you need to have cooling fans if they're especially large. Height, there's kind of a range of different positioning on this. Sometimes it's kind of the industry takes what it can get based on the pole heights that are there. Sometimes basically the main goal is to get it above surface clutter, so 20 to 40 feet is about typical. And as Kevin mentioned, almost all the ones that you see right now are 4G, but you have to keep in mind that whatever's going up now, this is mostly about real estate, and you're getting ready for 5G and the fact that a 4G antenna can be turned into a 5G, or they're going to have structures added onto a pole to make the 5G happen. Next slide, please. So why does putting an antenna up on a pole increase the speed? What's really happening here is you want to think about the migration from the previous round of cellular technology that was on and still is on large tower type structures. And they cover maybe a mile in a city, maybe a few miles in a rural area outward. And then just consider the fact that generally it's one of those structures or any kind of antenna structure is going to effectively serve a few hundred individuals at the same time. And that was fine when people were mostly doing phone calls or texts or short emails and that sort of thing. But as you get towards video and things like that, you start to max out and you start to have a lot more ubiquity of not just people with phones, but you have a lot of devices and so forth that independently connect. And so the idea is you put up a lot of little structures rather than having one big structure that covers a whole mile out, covering a few hundred people. You have little structures that cover 750 feet out, because we're now getting toward the part of this technology where you're going to have a few hundred people, maybe within a much smaller area. And this is called densification, and that's what small cells enable to happen. It enables you to cover what used to be covered in a large area in a small area, and therefore each slice of the pie is somewhat bigger for an individual user and allows them to use video and things like that. So next slide. Here's an area that's just a suburban area, and this isn't too different from the some of the drawings that I saw Kevin has on the slide deck here. But what you see now is that in a typical neighborhood where this small cell deployment is happening in earnest, you have a small cell every few blocks. The idea here is that you're going to be placing these close to in neighborhoods eventually, no longer just in commercial areas and major corridors. And what you're going to be doing is, from the point of view of placement, is going to have to take into account that these are going to be close to people's houses. Another thing to consider is lifetime. Radio structures like this have a shorter lifetime, at least the equipment in them does. Think of it more as the lifetime of a PC or laptop or a phone or something more like 5 or 10 years, as opposed to something like fiber or cable, which is much longer than that. Next slide. And then the other thing to think about is how the trend of deployment here, this is city of Boston, obviously major metro area, but what you do see here is that you see that the more built up areas, you've almost got structure on every block. And then as you go further and further out, you have less. Well, the trend is that dense deployment is kind of crawling further and further out from the town center, and then those outlying areas that don't have service are eventually getting service. And so you can kind of see this as an ongoing trend. So again, if your deployments are mostly in downtown and in arterial areas and commercial areas, that's going to develop into something that's going to be more commonly in residential areas. Next slide. To the point of aesthetics, if you don't step in as a community and plan what you want, and you don't come to agreements with the wireless providers, bad things happen. So here's an example of a pole that was just kind of let go. You have provider one come in, provider two kind of add their material, and essentially we have a structure that is not only unpleasant, but as you can see, it could be a hazard involving the vehicles down there, to visibility, to pedestrians, you name it. Next slide. Frequently, the wireless industry says that things are going much better overseas. We should use them as examples. These are photos in South Korea. So this can give you a sense of what happens when there's little or no local regulation to what's placed and what things look like from the safety and aesthetics point of view. And so you can see, again, communities like your city that have stepped forward and taken steps in this area, the importance of having done that. Next slide. So there are a lot of possibilities for what a city can achieve working with standards that it's created and working collaboratively with the industry. If you look to the right there, rather than having a disturbing looking structure with a lot of external cabinets and wires and so forth here, there are ways to conceal within a base, there are ways to conceal within a pole structure itself, and to have something that is workable for your community. The idea also is not to do one size fits all, as fortunately the courts and the FCC and so forth continue to allow. Local is important in the way that all these kinds of structures are put together. What might be acceptable in one community and desirable might be something that is seen to pose maybe an ADA hazard on the sidewalk in another. And so it's always important that local have the input and continue to do so. Next. So 5G, I want to spend some time going into that. There are a lot of myths about this. What is it? What isn't it? And part of why, as Kevin mentioned, when you go online and you find a lot of different stories about this, is because almost every single entity that's involved, whether it's a technology company, a wireless provider, a potential somebody who's like looking at things from a futurist or urban planning point of view, or an opponent to this sort of deployment, everybody has almost their own unique take on this. And that's because so little has been done so far as deployment. It's going to be a costly and difficult thing to put out a whole new generation of wireless technology, and we're just in the early stages. And as this slide says, essentially, we've gone from very limited prototype deployment in 2019 to just the beginning of wider scale deployment this year. And the thing is, it's going to take a lot of sites to put out to have this kind of coverage, and each one of them to have the capacity that's needed is going to have fiber optics run to them. This is going to take time, and remembering the short range of a lot of these devices and so forth with 5G, you end up, if you read reviews of these services in major metro areas, with a service that works, and you move a few blocks and it doesn't really work. And that's just the fact of the early days of the technology. But this is sort of where we are with 5G, and no doubt we'll be in a different place in the coming years. As Kevin mentioned, machine to machine is becoming important here, autonomous vehicles. And it's not just the speed, but the latency. In other words, the time it takes for a signal to go up and come back on one of these is designed to be much, much shorter, so that you can communicate with something like a drone or a vehicle that needs more or less instantaneous communication. Another thing that's important to remember here is slicing is a possible part of the model here. Right now, provider one puts something up, provider two puts something up, and you've got a lot of structures based on how many providers you have in an area. The hope is in the future that you can have a single device that, on a software type basis, can serve multiple providers using the same set of radios and equipment. That's something that's down the development path for 5G. It is not something that I've seen deployed yet, but is something that is hopefully in the works, and something that I think that communities would prefer in terms of avoiding a lot of independent standalone structures. Next. Just a little visual here of what this is going to look like. It's a little bit of a busy drawing here, but the concept here is that every few poles you would have wireless infrastructure like an antenna. One thing to remember about 5G, for reasons I'm going to go into, is that certain versions of it, the fastest versions of it, have real difficulty penetrating walls and windows. And so a lot of wireless companies are going to be looking at a solution for outdoors, but then perhaps working with the cable companies and other providers to provide indoor solutions to make sure that you have indoor and or outdoor signals with this. So there's going to be quite a lot going on, and for the reasons of the short distances and the difficulty of signal propagation, you're going to have a lot more antenna structures if we go to full 5G. Next slide. As I go into this discussion about RF and radiation and so forth, I want to just spend a little bit of time with a kind of a 101 on physics of light and radio transmission and that sort of thing. And the thing to think about here is we have this spectrum of electromagnetic radiation, of which we have very long wavelengths that have radio, classical radio type signals, AM, FM radio, and so forth. Those are the very longest wavelengths and the lowest frequencies of radiation that are there. And if you go to much higher frequencies, you have these new types of cellular systems, the millimeter wave and so forth. And if you go further, things that are not even on the chart there, you get to infrared, you get to visual light like we have here, and then eventually you get up to hardcore things like ultraviolet, X-rays and gamma rays and all that kind of thing. And the thing to remember here is the thing that's off in the left is a light wave that is very, very much like a wave. If you've ever kind of traveled around with AM radio and FM radio, you find that as you get to further and further away from cities and so forth, the AM radio works, the FM doesn't really work so well, because FM you kind of need to have something that's more like a line of sight. You go over mountains and hills and so forth and over a distance, and it doesn't work too well. But the AM kind of works because it'll go over and around the hills and that sort of thing. And that's what happens with cellular communications. The earlier types of cellular communications, they're kind of for longer distances. They're going to work okay indoors. They're going to work over longer distances. They're going to work okay when you go past through trees and so forth. But you get to these new technologies that they will be faster. They will do certain things that the older ones don't do, but they're ones that they don't work so well when you have obstructions. They don't work so well when you have mountains, hills, or even any kind of distance. And the way to think about it is it's no longer like a wave, like a radio signal that we're used to that can kind of wrap around things and travel through things. It's something that's more like a light beam. And that light beam, of course, if you put your hand up against the light, you block the light. The walls block the light. Windows will let light through, but to some extent block it. And then you go to higher and higher frequencies, and that's more and more the case. So more on this, I want to just kind of let's flip over to the next slide here, and I can show you a little bit more of what this is about here. So why is it that the wireless providers are looking to use things like this millimeter wave spectrum that you've been hearing about probably, and that I'm talking a little bit about today? And that's because if you look at the top bar there on that little chart that I provided, the one with the green and then the blue and red colors on the left there. The blue and red colors that are off to the left there, those little slivers, those are the existing bands that are used for cellular and Wi-Fi and everything right now. And then you look off to the right and you see all this green, and that green, that's the new spectrum that the wireless industry is looking to use. And you look how wide it is. That's part of why these kinds of spectrum bands, the idea is that they're going to be much, much faster, because all that bandwidth is going to translate into more and more speed. And that's how you're going to go from the kind of the slower speeds that you're used to with your cell phone and everything right now with your 2G, 3G, and 4G, and you get to the 5G, and it starts to use that higher frequency spectrum, and that's part of how you're going to get that speed. Okay, and that's why millimeter wave is coming in. It's these new bands that are coming forth, and that have the potential for being faster. Okay, so next slide. So in reality, what this is going to look like is you're going to have a structure that's a small cell like you're used to seeing, but you're going to have other radios that are going to kind of be tacked onto it that provide the millimeter wave component. This is clearest on the picture in the middle. It's in Baltimore. The tops part of it is the popsicle piece that you see there is the 4G piece. And then you have a millimeter wave radio that's underneath it. And if you look on the left, that's a urban in Chicago. It's more or less the same kind of thing. And so that's what we're going to start seeing. Even a structure that you approved today for 4G, the idea that the industry have is that it'll start to tack things on that'll handle this 5G technology. One thing to remember about 5G is that 4G has some limited capability to use these antennas and so forth that are in place to provide service for multiple providers. In other words, to have a multi-tenant structure. Right now with the 5G millimeter wave, each of the companies has their own individual way of doing this. So the industry right now is looking at, okay, one pole will be the Verizon pole, another will be the AT&T pole, and so forth. And you know, that's kind of the way things are looking right now. Next slide. A lot of 5G, there was nothing exotic. You probably have seen advertising from T-Mobile in particular, and maybe others, about like, hey, get 5G right now. We've got 5G everywhere. I think T-Mobile already claims to have a nationwide 5G network. What they're doing, though, is really what I would like to call new radio or software 5G. And so it's basically something that on a tower looks really almost the same as 4G or 3G, as you see in this case here. And it's actually using the low band, the spectrum I was talking about that was more radio-ish. And it's really not at this stage hugely different from 4G. Maybe 20-30% increase right now. It is a 20-30% increase, so that's something. But a lot of what you're seeing when you hear about 5G right now is basically taking some of the existing spectrum. It's some improvement, but it's not the enormous improvement that you're going to see with the millimeter wave that I was showing earlier. Next slide. So this is the part that Kevin asked me to kind of bring to you and focus on, and I wanted to bring the other slides to you as sort of an introduction to this. RF is the main thing I think that to understand about RF or any kind of radiation is the inverse square law is very important, and that's a little bit jargony there, but I guess I should say more specifically and clearly, distance is hugely important, and it's distance squared that's important. So if you have an issue with radiation exposure or whatever else, the biggest way that anyone deals with it is distance. And so in having a structure or an antenna or something that radiates, once you get a certain distance away from it, which may not be a very large distance, the impact of that radiation goes down significantly. So when you're thinking about something like a small cell installation, like the ones we were just looking at there, it's really worth comparing the level of radiation that comes out of something like that from the level of radiation of something that we might hold closer to us, and just sort of think about the relative levels here. So what I decided to do was do a comparison of what would it be, what's the exposure level of essentially if you've got a phone with you running, in speaking mode, you're talking on the phone. What is, and you're holding that 3 inches away from you, which is, frankly, a little bit further away than many of us do when we talk. How does that compare to a small cell? So I did that analysis with one of the smaller small cells, one with a single panel, and basically compared that to the 3 inches. And what we found is that the answer is that you'd have to be 2 feet away from the front of that antenna, the one that's sitting 20 feet up on the pole, to get that same level of exposure that you would get from your phone already. And by the way, it's very similar. The red line there that you see is basically like if you're 5 centimeters away from a microwave oven that's working properly and has the door closed and everything. So the phone, the microwave, that sort of thing, if you want to compare it to how far away you'd have to be from a small cell, you'd have to be two feet away from it. Okay, and remember, it's 20 feet up and it's pointed in a different direction. Next slide. So I thought, okay, let's look at a small cell that is the absolute highest power that we've seen. One that, like Verizon, for example, likes to put a lot of radios onto its poles and operate at high power with larger antennas and so forth. What would it be if you took those antennas and you put those up on the poles? What would the distance be with those? And it would be further away. You'd have to be 9 feet away to get the same level of exposure that you'd want to get, that you would get potentially from a cell phone. So the thought process there is where would that be relevant? Well, if you were on the ground, you would again be 15 or 20 feet away, and you wouldn't be directly in the beam path of the antenna. The antenna is more or less pointed straight out from the pole. It's not pointed down toward the ground. So you're at a very, very low percentage of exposure from a small cell antenna. And that's purely a factor of the fact that you are, it is higher power. It is something we have to be concerned about. It is something where we have to have measurements, and it's something where you're going to want to have this provider certify to you in writing that it is a safe structure and that it complies with the FCC. But the distance consideration is the key consideration. And if it is something that is 15 or 20 feet away from you, it is something that is a significantly lower radiation level than a risk that many of us accept from a phone or from a microwave oven or from a Wi-Fi device in our house, that sort of thing. Next slide. But I think that we don't want to ignore this, and we don't want to say, well, okay, this is a completely safe structure. We don't want to play games with this, and that's why, again, FCC rule compliance is very important at a minimum. You want to certify that they are showing that their structure is in compliance. And one of the ways that this is done is that many communities require EME reports, in other words, electromagnetic emission reports from the exposure that comes from various types of installations. And so what you see here on the map is an EME report from a rooftop that a county required from a wireless provider that was looking to put a structure on the rooftop. The yellow areas that you see on this map are the areas where you're 100% or more of the level that is the maximum permissible level by the FCC. So as you can see, that's directly in front of the antennas, and it's out to a few feet from there. So it's very important that people don't go there, and that if you have to go there because you're somebody maintaining the roof or that you have business up there, you have to be able to have that antenna shut off for the duration of your work. Next slide, please. So, and on a day-to-day basis, what happens is that people who are certified to do this sort of work on a pole or who work for the wireless industry are trained in RF emissions. And you have different sorts of signs and so forth that warn of the kinds of emissions that are there. The blue signs warn the general public, and that would be a sign that would basically warn you perhaps not to even go up on a rooftop, that this is too high a level for the general public, and that basically you could come into contact with RF radiation. The yellow and orange signs are for individuals that may have to work on a roof with wireless structures, who should be trained in RF safety, or individuals who be working on light poles perhaps, or individuals who work for the wireless industry who install these things. And so those signs would be there, and if you squint really hard, you can see that there's an orange one there on the back of that antenna telling you not to go back there. Facilities like this should have locked doors, and there should be fences around the structure like what we're looking at as well. Next slide. What this would look like for a small cell on a light pole is that you would have the entity that is mounting the structure would put one of the appropriate sign at the appropriate place on the pole to warn that you're going into proximity to the radiation exposure. So this is a picture that a drawing that Kevin provided for me of one of the wireless installations in Fargo. And so the appropriate place would be somewhere on the pole that you would warn somebody who, either from the wireless industry or somebody perhaps from the city or could be maintaining the light pole or something like that, that they're up there, and that there's the phone number that they need to call to notify that the structure needs to be turned off because of maintenance that needs to happen up there. Next slide. And next. So I'll go through this really quick because I think you've got a lot of this in hand here, and essentially there's a wide range of things, not as wide maybe as the city might want in regulating the structures and in leverage with the industry, but these are the kinds of things that are done that have been found to be acceptable so far. So the idea would be to provide potential attachers with places that are acceptable, places that are potentially acceptable, and places that are not acceptable as far as the city's concerned for location. These can be based on historic, residential, and that sort of thing. Sometimes the way that communities manage locating these is to say, well, we would like to have these in poles in parks, let's say, so that they're not in residential neighborhoods near houses. So you may have like small pocket parks and green spaces and things like that. Other communities will look at this and say, well, no, we have children playing there, so that's the last place that we want to have a structure like this. Again, different communities, different ways. Another way that this is handled in neighborhoods is that if we're looking at a neighborhood, for example, with streetlights or wooden utility poles, frequently a community will say, look, we want to have these structures, if they're located in a community, to be at a pole on a property line, which, as we know, is one that's going to have more setback from a house than another. And that's important, not just for RF, because as I think many of you are aware, the RF rules are the FCC RF rules, and it may be in compliance with RF, but also because an individual property owner may not want to have one of these structures directly in front of their place. So you sort of split the difference by putting it at a property boundary. A lot of communities go with that. Another way that this sort of thing is regulated is setback requirements. And so frequently that's consistent with setback requirements of other similar structures. Again, traffic signal poles, light poles, and that sort of thing, and proximity to windows and then that sort of thing. Next slide. So finally, just in conclusion, we've got small cells, you've got small cells, and Fargo has successfully navigated a lot of this process. And so, as mentioned, the rest of the state is following lead. It's a good pat on your back for the work that has been done by the group on this. But remember, most of the work that's being done on small cells in this early stage is in downtown areas, arterials, industrial areas. And so the installation of these in residential areas is often something that hasn't begun and something that needs to be considered. And you have many constraints under the FCC order, but you also have the ability to protect your infrastructure by having standards that are reasonable and fair and within the guidelines allowed by the FCC. Continue with the processes that you have that provide predictable, good guidance to the applicants in the industry that you seem to be working very well with. And then, again, given the limitations on what the city is charging and the amount of work that it takes to review applications and process these and get public input, one way that we highly recommend that cities try to lighten their own load is by requiring extensive submittals by applicants about everything to do with structural safety, RF safety, and placement, and all these other sorts of things with their professional engineering certifications by the applicant, so that it's less work on the part of the city engineer, and that the information is there in writing when the city and the public want to review that. So with that, it looks like I'm at the end of my half hour. I'd like to take any questions that are here, and thank you again for your time today.
Any questions by Commissioner Pepcorn?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I have a question about the setbacks. Kevin, can you talk about, do we have that? And also from our expert, just can we get some examples from them? Because I think especially from residential and businesses where there's people there, I think we should have setbacks. And what's the reasonable number? That's my curiosity. Thank you.
I think my recollection is we don't have any requirements for setbacks. I think the best we have right now is that we're encouraging them to put it on a lot line. Trying to remember all the things we put down there. So that's probably something we need to work on.
I guess, and to our speaker, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind talking about that, do you recommend that we would have setbacks, or is that something, I know you talk about that, but I guess, especially in the downtown, if you have an apartment building near, I would be concerned if I lived there. So either Andrew or whoever else can answer. Thank you.
Hey, Andrew, if I can jump in quick. So you have two things. You have setbacks and you have spacings. And we do have a minimum spacing between small cells. So that is one thing that is in our ordinance, is that there is a spacing that if there is one there, they have to be so far apart. And then, like Kevin said, is we kept our ordinance so that we can make sure they're not placed in front of windows and stuff like that.
I guess my concern is not spacing between the poles. I could care less whether that, my concern is if I'm just picturing myself living in residential downtown Fargo and having a small cell pole right outside my window, I would not feel, and so to me that concern could be answered with setbacks, and I think we should look at that. That's just my opinion.
Andrew, have you seen anything on setbacks in your professional?
Yes. So there's a range, and I can send some examples from other agreements that we've seen, but setbacks are difficult in the kind of environment that the council member mentioned, because in an urban area, you may just have road, sidewalk, and building, a large building right there. So where I've seen them mostly is in a residential area that's single family, or one that's not sort of a built up downtown area where it's consistent with where a light pole might be already. But it's in an urban area, you could potentially put something in place. It would just be the difficulty then would be in trying to find a place where they could put the pole, and what that may end up leading to is preferential placement in an intersection where on the diagonal you're able to get more distance away from a building than in the center block. In New York City, the way that they deal with it is that they actually don't allow the use of center block. And that's one way of in an environment like that where you are almost always having light poles that are very close to a house, that you end up with a situation that it's very hard to avoid a large setback. But I think again, this is something that it's not only a city by city type thing, but I think has to be looked at by your planning people on a neighborhood by neighborhood area, and should be done in conjunction with the idea of, okay, if not on a pole here, well, what would work? And so the intersection may be an option, the in between buildings may be an option, and therefore you don't want a setback requirement that would have the effect of making it entirely impossible for a half-mile area to find any kind of structure at all. But a setback could be a useful thing to have in that environment to gear the applicant toward places that are not going to be directly in front of a window.
So Commissioner Pepcorn, just so you know too, Nancy does have the ordinance. So they are not allowed within 5 feet of a door, balcony, or window, nor placed in front of any window within 20 feet. So we do have that in our ordinance.
Commissioner Garrett.
My mind went to the same place. It's a safety concern, right? The only emails that I've received about 5G are from people who are afraid it's going to radiate them, right? Mm-hmm. So is there a document? Is there a study? Is there something quick I can send people who send me emails and say, look, here's the study, the outcome, and there are 3 outcomes they came with. You're safe. If you're within 20 feet, you're safe. If you're in 5, whatever, of your balcony, which is in our ordinance, then you're safe. You see what I'm saying? Because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, so when I'm trying to explain it, I sound stupid. So I want to have you guys show us something that says it is safe.
So I'm just going to start reviewing the one we just received. So our applications are just coming in. So I can't answer if it's in that exact document. But when I get the calls and when I talk to providers, their response is always, we are complying with FCC regulations for emissions. And I don't know what that is. And I agree with you. I don't know how to answer it.
If I could just throw something in, one thing that might be useful is to request an EME report that similar to the one that I showed on the screen that has not only a statement, okay, well, we're in compliance, but also shows, well, here's where you would have to be out of compliance. And if it is in fact just 1 foot away where the hazard area is, and that there's no way to kind of get to that point unless you're just hanging from the pole, directly in front of it, then that tells a certain story. Again, it's just with respect to the FCC rules, and it is kind of what it is, but I think that there's more that can be done than just having a line written that says, okay, well, we're in compliance, trust us, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I'm super skeptical of that type of answer. I mean, we do things arbitrarily all the time in government. I have an order in front of me that says we can have 25% capacity in restaurants, completely arbitrary. So if we are saying that we're complying with an arbitrary number that the FCC gave, it's not good enough for me, and I would not expect anyone who's writing an email, who's so concerned that they're writing us an email about it, that they would take that as an answer. So I want something that I can feel good about, saying, yeah, 20 feet away from your window makes sense because of this. This study says that. 5 feet away from your balcony is okay. Just don't hug it. It'll be okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's all I'm asking for.
I think what we're requesting is just practical. So in medicine, oftentimes they always could refer to chest x-rays. This has enough radiation as a chest x-ray, so therefore you're clear. But Tony's point, 2G is one, 3G is another, 4G is another, 5G, just a practical table would help that out, just so people could understand. And I understand that FCC will try to protect us, but people just want practical answers because that's really what happens. Andrew, you talked about 2.5 feet on your cell phone, which I found interesting today, because maybe I should always set my cell phone down when I'm talking to somebody rather than put it next to my ear. there's always been debate about, do you get brain tumors from cell phones? So it's always in the scientific area that we usually have good results or demonstrations. And I think what we're requesting as a commission, just can we have some simple table or something that we can refer them to? Here's how much radiation you get, here's what you should do, blah, blah, blah. Because no, I'm not going to climb up a pole and get rid of in front of that ray. I understand that, but just the practicality. Because people call in about 5G all the time and are very concerned about health issues. Mr. Strand, you had something?
I more have a comment on it than anything. There's about 3 people I hear from regularly that are really concerned about 5G. Then you hear them referring to people around the world burning towers. They think over in China that it's mind control. They think that there's others that think that this vaccine coming for COVID is going to be triggered by 5G and do things to us that we can't even fathom. So this health question and the impacts of radiation and radio frequency, I think, is critical for us to be able to answer in layman's terms. I guess a couple questions. One is, with radiation, and maybe Dr. Mahoney knows this, but with radiation, is that a cumulative or a one-time thing? If you have a ongoing, consistent, persistent exposure, even if it's a little bit less in a distance, is that a concern versus a one-time close-up exposure? Does it have a residual accumulating effect on the body?
Want your experts to go? Or?
Andrew, do you have
So again, I'm not speaking at all from any kind of medical standpoint. So what I will say is that if you recall on the slides, there were 3 different signs there with the FCC level warnings about radiation, and the one on the far left was about the level for the general public. And so there are different levels. There's a much more stringent one for the general public. And the idea that the FCC had when that was put out was essentially that's the level that would be okay to have exposure to, could be for a long time, right? Cumulative is, just like if you touch a stove, whereas if you hold on to something that's really hot, obviously you get much more damaged if you hold on to the hot thing, and let your hand continue to be burned. Sunburn, same thing. So cumulative is important, but the reason that the FCC has one level for occupational exposure and one level for general public exposure is that it deems the general exposure level to be the one that you could get a lot of exposure to over a long period of time without being affected by it. Again, I'm not a doctor, I'm an engineer, and I'm just giving you the FCC standard, but that's for what it is.
And Mayor,
John, that's a tricky question because we read radiation tags all the time when we're working, and you can sustain low amounts, but we also use radiation therapy for cancer killing. So we have radiologists sometimes will get skin cancers on their hands because they're exposed. And typically when you're overexposed, you have to back off for a while to allow some recovery. But there is an ounce of cumulative, so people are very careful about their exposure.
so that's a health question that I think the more we have assistance answering those questions to the people, that would be important. Last, I'll get practical just for a moment. What will things look like in 20 or 30 or 40 years? We've just put in a bunch of new streetlights in all of our neighborhoods. I don't know to what degree they were planned to anticipate this type of attachments put on them or not. And then I'm wondering, is there an exit plan? Say some of these businesses and technologies go south. Do they remove the equipment? Do we have criteria, I'm assuming, to remove this all out of, how does that all work?
So as far as removal, the master attachment agreement talks about that, where we can take it down, we can do things like that if it's no longer being used.
And the streetlights that we've just put in, are they planned for this?
Well, not usually, but like we have a project like on 3rd Avenue, we have in our CIP, so they're kind of holding on. But then we realize we don't always replace the lights when we do a project. If it's a water main replacement project, we don't touch the lights anyway. So, when we know about projects and we're able to work with the provider, we're coordinating that as best we can. but we don't always get them all. I mean, their ideas kind of go back and forth as well.
So, some of the things that have been impressive too is we've built a pretty good relationship for those coming in too. And if they see a project coming up in our CIP and they know within the next year or two that they want a small cell in there, they have paid that cost at that point and beefed up the footing ready for it. So we have been keeping in communication with the people working on the applications to try and mitigate some of those future costs for them. Because it is costs that they take on themselves, not the city.
Arlette, did you have anything?
Just a question, and it's more contextual, but I walked in a little bit late. I don't know if this got covered. Where are we in this process? Do we have providers that are waiting to put these up? Do we have some up already? It sounds like we already have an ordinance in place.
Yeah, so we have 5 small cell installations along the 42nd Street corridor from like Main Avenue down to the interstate. Those are all 4G. Those are mobility, which was connected to Sprint. They merged with T-Mobile now. We have an application for 4 small cells in the downtown area that Verizon wants to install in 2021. So it's coming. I just don't, I don't know how fast. I don't know, all those things, but I anticipate it to pick up once they kind of get used to our process and get used to how it goes and all those things. I think it's going to pick up. And then back to the question on looking ahead, the light pole on the corner of the Mercantile parking ramp, so at the 4th Avenue and 5th Street, that actually has an enhanced footing in it already for a future small cell. Just one example.
Well, Andrew and Gordon, thank you very much for this update. You have our request of some things we'd like. If you'd follow up with us, that'd be great. And I think probably the commissioners, if there's more projects that come up, would like to be informed of them, of where they're going in places. But I anticipate what you're doing is Commissioner Preston will have the best 5G because it's going downtown. Is that right? So if we want to watch a movie, we should go over to her place because it'll come on in 4 seconds. Right?
That's right. At least download it there and go watch it where you want.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.